What happened to the Caribbean pirates?
In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, merchant vessels traveling anywhere
Shit was
near the
low.
Caribbean Sea were
Lock
terrified
me
of
in,
being
bro.
attacked by pirates. And for good reason. These pirates were skilled sailors, tough, resourceful, and most worryingly, fearless. Their favorite targets were ships heading back to Europe, loaded with cargoes of gold and silver from colonies in the Americas. However, plundering was soon to come to a crashing halt. As the European nations began assembling larger and more organized militaries, the Caribbean pirates were eventually forced to look elsewhere for booty. By around 1720, the navies of Britain, Spain, and France had become far too powerful for the pirates to contend with. European nations with interests in the Americas had simply had enough of piracy threatening their shipments. They declared war on the pirates, and their navies began actively targeting and destroying pirate gangs and their ships. A decade later, the pirates had all but disappeared from the Caribbean, and instead turned their sights on less protected seas, such as the Indian Ocean. In its heyday, piracy in the Caribbean, I apologize, was an almost unstoppable force of murderous pillaging and looting. From the 1670s to the 1730s, pirate gangs formed their own ports and Caribbean bases in the Bahamas,
Pirate gangs.
Jamaica, and Haiti. From here, they were able
They
to
was
carry
Bloods and
out
Crips and
vicious
shit.
and often highly profitable attacks on merchant ships headed back to Europe with spoils from the colonies. It was an exciting and certainly dangerous career choice, but most pirates saw the gamble as worth it.
Wait, so did the pirates start the gang shit? 'Cause they say 1730. Oh, they say 1670. And he got some red on, and the other folks got the blue on. So they really started this shit. They really fathered this. You know.
In Haiti. From here, they were able to carry out vicious and often highly profitable attacks on merchant ships headed back to Europe with spoils from the colonies. It was an exciting and certainly dangerous career choice, but most pirates saw the gamble as worth it. The lure of a short life full of glory versus a miserable daily toil to make ends meet back in Europe was too good for many to resist. So who exactly were these pirates of the Caribbean? No, okay. Well, who were they? Most had some kind of seafaring background. Many were former merchant seamen who had spent years toiling away on hazardous seas for measly paydays and bleak futures. Others had been in the Navy and were either in between wars with nothing to do, or had quit after being enticed by the lawless lives of freedom they saw being enjoyed by pirates. Some of the most skilled pirates were former privateers. Privateers were hired by European governments to assist in fighting foreign enemies at sea or to harass their commercial vessels. Britain, France, Spain, the Netherlands, Portugal, and the US all used the services of privateers. at some point.
Neverland.
They were especially good at maneuvering small ships, deftly around larger and slower
Or
vessels
some shit.
before boarding them. Buccaneers were a type of privateer, basically mercenaries hired to wreak havoc on enemy ships. However, buccaneers were not pirates, who acted completely lawlessly and of their own will. The Caribbean pirates also consisted of wretched souls who had nothing to lose. Escaped slaves or convicts would find work easily on a pirate ship, and those born with a natural criminal disposition were soon drawn to piracy, as the potential booty at sea was far greater than anything on land. The pirates came from everywhere, but most were from Europe. Some came from the Caribbean region itself, such as Mexico and Haiti,
The what
many
on the
having
sea?
escaped from working plantations or colonial rule. Others were recruited from the African West Coast and indigenous American tribes. The popular method of gaining new recruits was to attack a slave ship. Slaves didn't need much convincing with or without sailing experience. The chance of freedom and to exact some sweet revenge on the slave traders was more than enough motivation. Caribbean pirates set up bases in places such as Nassau, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Haiti. These areas consisted of endless, intricated bays and inlets that were ideal
I'm understanding it now, chat. I see the plot. Them niggas is on BT. Like they don't give a fuck. They just want booty. On some shit. That's what they call it.
for not only evading capture, but also for storing stolen goods and treasure. The pirates built settlements in their Caribbean havens, and they were ready to move on if any authorities or rival gangs began to sniff out on their whereabouts. Their goal was simple: to loot anything headed for Europe. Ships loaded with gemstones, gold, and
See, they
silver
don't get no
were
fuck.
where
They
the money
moving
was at.
anything.
And pirates quite rightly saw one good score as setting them up for life. Not that these were the types to think too far into the future, but the carrot
But
of a lifetime.
maybe this is just a battle bus and they just trying to open as many chests as possible, chat. I think that's the mission that they on. They just trying to open as many chests as possible. And maybe get a blue chest. If OGs know what those are.
Salary
You're trying to
enticed
get a blue
many a
chest,
disgruntled Navy member or merchant seaman. By the late 17th century, several European powers had a foothold in the Caribbean region. Spain, Britain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and France were all profiting from the rich pool of resources just waiting to be shipped back to the old country. It wasn't just limited to gold and silver, though. Sugar and tobacco were proving to be hugely profitable goods back in Europe,
Niggas was
and
stealing
other goods
bags
such
of
as
sugar?
silk, spices, indigo, rum, and furs could easily be sold for a tidy profit. The Caribbean pirates often got word about a merchant vessel carrying a particularly valuable piece of cargo, or multiple pieces of cargo. They would pay for such information, or would simply take their chances when they spotted a likely-looking target. Lone ships traveling along a straight route were the easiest to attack. The pirates would often approach from the target ship's stern, or the rear, as this was the least likely place to have cannons. While many pirate ships did indeed carry cannons, they were reluctant to fire them at ships that were attacking for fear of damaging them. After all, if the targeted ship was in better condition than their own, why not claim it? As for whether Caribbean pirates really flew the Jolly Roger flags on their ships, you bet they did. There's plenty of evidence in diaries,
Jolly
sketches,
Roger. Oh,
and
so that's a
woodcuts
real
from
thing.
the era that depict the famous skull and crossbones image, which was hoisted to warn vessels to prepare for attack. Red flags were also used by pirates, which sent an even more sinister warning that if any resistance was offered, they would kill everyone on board. Needless to say, most ships pretty quickly adhered to the warnings. Pirates steered well clear of any naval ships, however, as the Navy cannons were far too powerful to fool around with, and just not worth the effort. Once on board, pirates located the ship's cargo and they began loading it. They also made sure to relieve the passengers and crew of any possessions that happened to take their fancy. Merchant ships generally only had a
Navy
handful
had
of crew
boats in the
members, none of whom fancied the
1670s.
idea of laying down their lives for someone else's cargo.
It was a Navy.
Anything else that was deemed
What the
worthwhile
fuck?
was also
I thought
taken.
niggas was just-
Weapons,
it was just free
ammunition,
player.
food, medicine, and of course,
Jesus and
rum.
free roam.
After taking whatever they needed, the pirates made off
Like,
for the
shit didn't
Caribbean
get started
hideaways.
yet.
These were carefully
still in
chosen
development,
locations,
you know?
tucked away in secluded, hard-to-find harbors and bays. The pirates sold their booty to smugglers and crafty
sold
merchants
they
who would
booty.
pay them and then Pirates sold their booty to smugglers and crafty merchants who would pay them and then resell the goods in legitimate ports back in Europe. These pirate havens sometimes became bustling port towns of illegal trading, liquor houses, and brothels. In other words, a pirate's dream. As attacks became more and more prevalent in the Caribbean, some countries were forced to use convoys to protect their cargoes. Spain was the first to utilize the convoy system, sending precious cargo back several times a year on ships accompanied by Navy vessels. These Navy ships were bolstered with massive cannons and very heavily armed soldiers. Pirates soon learned that it was foolish to attack these convoys, as tempting as it must have been. Towards the end of the 1720s,
Like, fuck a switch. Imagine getting hit with a cannonball.
Britain and France, in particular, had had enough.
Oh, shit.
The Caribbean pirates were too seriously disrupting the highly profitable sugar and tobacco supply chains from the Americas. Added to this, many pirate gangs were also attacking slave ships from West Africa and recruiting slaves. Slaves were becoming more and more important.
I was thinking that earlier, but I didn't want to say that because, like, that was fucked up to just assume. But I'm like, yeah, if they stop in their boats and they got slaves on their boat and they got resources on their boat, why don't y'all just kill the slave traders and take the slaves? In GTA, of course. But, like, that's like the, you know?
As an essential workforce for the British and French colonies and their plantations. The party was over. Britain, in particular, began rebuilding its navy and personnel in order to go to war with the pirates. More ships were built, with more cannons installed to be fired in all directions.
Oh, shit.
Corrupt port officials who had knowingly traded with pirates were fired or jailed, when more naval crew members were recruited and trained. Britain also acted towards discouraging sailors from becoming
Holy
pirates.
shit.
Until the early 1700s, if a pirate was caught, they would have to be transported all the way back to England for trial and likely execution.
Shit.
Under
Hold on, let's
new laws,
let's get past
courts
that.
were
That's
opened up in the
GTA. That's all
colonies.
in GTA. I forgot what the fuck I was about to say now.
Pirates could now be quickly brought to justice and an inevitable hanging,
Holy
which
shit.
made many
No,
a
whoa, whoa.
For
No,
starters,
no,
the
they
Caribbean
don't.
ships were
That's
smaller
Red
and they
Dead.
could
That's Red
zip
Dead
to
2
safety in
chat.
shallower waters. The pirates also knew the backwaters of the Caribbean inlets intimately, and they could escape capture by lying low until their pursuers just moved on. The most telling blow for the Caribbean pirates came with the end of the War of the Spanish Succession. This was a power struggle that involved almost every major power in Western Europe,
Was
and when
this
it
like a
finished in
pirate war then?
1714, it left masses of highly skilled sailors without a job. While many of these men would have earlier become pirates,
Wait, so it was
they were
only
now
one
being
pirate
recruited by
gang?
navies. Better conditions, better pay, plus the fact that pirates were being punished more than ever, were major factors behind Navy recruit members skyrocketing. This left countries such as Britain and France with exactly the power punch they needed to wipe out the pirates. Navy patrols were sent out to police the Caribbean waters with orders to either kill or capture any pirates they came across.
Holy.
The results were almost immediate. Between 1716 and 1726 alone, more than 400
Wow.
men were hung out
And
and cleared
GTA,
of looting
whoa,
and
get that off my
terrorizing
screen,
vessels and
gang.
passengers, and they lived heartily off the spoils of their booty. In the end, though, they were holding back good old economic growth, which simply would not do. They had finally rattled the wrong cage.